The phone rang in the dim hours before dawn, February 1961. Joe DiMaggio picked up. On the other end, a voice from Payne Whitney Psychiatric Clinic. Urgent. Marilyn needed out. She had checked in for rest, prescribed by her doctor. Exhaustion from the films, the lights, the endless gaze of the world. But inside those walls, no rest waited. Stripped of her clothes. Locked in a padded cell. Examined like a specimen. She banged a chair against the observation window until it cracked. Threatened to cut her wrists with the shards if they didn't let her go. Help me, she scrawled in a note passed to a nurse. They ignored it. Carried her, struggling, to another floor. There, in the quiet isolation of that room, the icon of glamour became just another patient, her public smile shattered into private terror. Outside, the billboard still glowed with her image skirt billowing in the 7-year itch, a symbol of effortless allure. Crowds cheered. Magazines sold her as the epitome of desire. But here, in the locked ward, she was Norma Jean again, the girl who'd bounced through foster homes, fearing the madness that claimed her mother. Nights like these defined her hidden world. Insomnia gripped her long before the clinic. Barbiturates on the bedside table, a ritual to chase sleep. When pills failed, books became her companions. Ulysses by Joyce, dense pages under a solitary lamp in her Sutton Place apartment. Words to fill the void where monsters lurked, peaceful ones, she called them, projections on a screen of pitch blackness while the city slumbered. Short calls in the dark. To her psychiatrist, Dr. Greenson, confessing the anguish. I think maybe I'm crazy like all the other members of my family. Her voice, tiny and wisped in private, nothing like the breathy seduction the cameras captured. Power on screen, but in those closed rooms, control slipped away. Studios dictated her schedule, her image, her worth. Marriages offered escape, yet chained her deeper. With Arthur Miller it started as trust. He is the only person I trust as much as myself, she wrote in her diary during their early days in Amagansett. Lazy afternoons by the sea, away from flashes. But then the betrayal. Rifling through his things one evening, she found his journal open. Pages complaining she embarrassed him, let him down. The words stung like a slap in a silent room. Her heart, already fragile from miscarriages, cracked further. She turned to habits that soothed the isolation. Poetry scribbled on hotel stationery. Dreams recorded in fragments, a surgeon cutting her open, finding nothing inside, disappointing everyone. Fame's glow outside, but within, the fear of emptiness. Relationships controlled by expectations, agents hovering, friends like Peter Lawford eyed with suspicion, his strange gaze making her wonder if he'd poison her out of envy. One such night, after filming Let's Make Love, she reached for the phone again. Eve Montant on the line, their affair a secret tangle amid the scripted romance. Whispers and trailers, stolen moments that the public never glimpsed. But even that connection frayed, leaving her alone with the pills, the books, the unanswered questions. What drove her to the edge that February? The weight of it all pressing in, unseen by the adoring masses. And as DiMaggio raced to the clinic, breaking protocols to pull her free, the real scandal simmered beneath. The layers of a life scripted for the screen but unraveling in the shadows. DiMaggio arrived, his face set like stone, the retired slugger turned reluctant rescuer. He demanded her release, pulling strings with old connections, his voice low but insistent in the sterile hallway. By morning she was out, transferred to Columbia Presbyterian Hospital for what they called proper care. Rest, they said. Recovery. But in those quiet hospital rooms, with curtains drawn against the winter light filtering through New York skyscrapers, the fears didn't dissipate. They coiled tighter. She lay there, staring at the ceiling, the hum of the city a distant murmur. Publicly she was the comeback queen, poised for Something's Got to Give, her image polished anew in glossy spreads. Yet privately the routines that anchored her were fraying. Mornings began with orange juice laced with vodka, a subtle kick to dull the edges before facing the mirror. Makeup applied with precision, but hands trembling slightly, remnants of the barbiturates from the night before. Nembutal, Seconal, chloral hydrate. They lined her nightstand like sentinels, prescribed liberally by doctors who saw her as a patient, not a person. She'd swallow them with champagne, chasing oblivion in her Brentwood home, the one she'd bought to mimic a sense of normalcy far from Hollywood's glare. Isolation wrapped around her like the fog rolling in off the Pacific. Friends were few, vetted carefully. Eunice Murray, her housekeeper, hovered in the background, a constant presence installed by Dr. Greenson. Therapy sessions stretched into hours, sometimes daily, in the analyst's Beverly Hills office or her own living room, converted into a confessional. He'd probe her dreams, her childhood wounds, the orphanage days, the absent father, the mother institutionalized for schizophrenia. "I'm afraid of losing my mind," she'd whisper, her voice cracking in the dim light of those closed sessions. Greensun listened, nodding, but his control deepened. He suggested she limit contact with certain people, reshaping her circle like a director blocking a scene. One evening in early 1962, as the sun dipped below the hills, a phone call shattered the routine. Frank Sinatra on the line, inviting her to Calneva Lodge for a weekend getaway. She went, seeking respite among the Rat Pack's easy camaraderie. But behind the casino's glamour, unsettling undercurrents stirred. Whispers of mob ties, shared suites with Sam Giancana lingering in the air like cigarette smoke. She posed for photos by the lake, her smile radiant for the cameras, but in private, the paranoia crept in. Was that a figure in the shadows? A click on the phone line during late-night calls? Her home wired, perhaps rumors of FBI surveillance, taps ordered by Hoover himself, monitoring her connections to powerful men. Those men. John Kennedy, the president, with his charming drawl over secure lines. Brief encounters in hotel rooms, arranged discreetly, leaving her with mementos, a pearl necklace, a whispered promise. But the reality was colder power imbalances that stripped her of agency. He'd call from the White House, voice warm, but the conversations turned one-sided, her role reduced to listener, comforter. Then Robert, the brother, stepping in as confidant. Long talks about justice, civil rights, her idealism shining through. Yet even there, control slipped. Decisions about her career, her public statements influenced by their orbit. She confided in her diary, pages filled with poetry fragments. "Help, help, help, I feel life coming closer when all I want is to die." The words, scrawled in looping script, hidden in drawers away from prying eyes. Nights blurred into rituals of solitude. In her Mexican-tiled hacienda, she'd wander the halls barefoot, a white terry robe wrapped around her, stopping to play records, Ella Fitzgerald's voice filling the emptiness. Or she'd sit by the pool under starless skies, dipping her toes in the cool water, replaying arguments in her mind. With Fox Studios, battles over scripts, pay, respect. They suspended her, publicly shaming the star, while privately she nursed the wounds of yet another miscarriage, the dream of motherhood eluding her like a fading spotlight. Unusual visitors came and went. A psychic one afternoon, reading tarot cards in the living room, predicting turmoil. Or Lawford again, dropping by with veiled invitations to parties at the beach house, where politicians mingled and secrets spilled. She sensed the manipulation, the way they used her allure as currency. One such visit ended in tension. Raised voices behind closed doors, her pushing back against demands she couldn't voice aloud. As summer heated up, the pills multiplied. Decisions loomed: fire the housekeeper? End the therapy? Break free from the Kennedy's pull? In a quiet moment, alone in the fragile web of alliances that had sustained her through the spotlight's relentless burn. The voice on the other end belonged to Robert Kennedy, his tone clipped, official, yet laced with that undercurrent of intimacy that had grown between them over months of discreet meetings. She spoke in hushed fragments, her words tumbling out like scattered pearls, complaints about the studio's iron grip, the exhaustion that clawed at her bones, and a vague plea for intervention. "Help me with Fox," she urged, her voice threading through the static of the line. "They're treating me like a commodity, not a person." Bobby promised to look into it, his assurances smooth as polished marble, but in the silence after the call ended, she paced the room, the Persian rug muffling her steps, wondering if she'd just handed over another piece of her autonomy to a man whose world revolved around power plays far beyond her Hollywood battles. That call set off ripples she couldn't foresee, threading into the tapestry of her private unraveling. Days later, a visitor arrived unannounced at her Fifth Helena drive home, a modest hacienda nestled in the Brentwood cul-de-sac, its white walls and red-tiled roof a facade of serenity amid the chaos. It was Eunice Murray again, but this time with Dr. Greensun trailing behind, his briefcase in hand like a talisman against her demons. They settled in the living room, sunlight slanting through the arched windows onto the Mexican furniture she'd collected during a trip south of the border, pieces that evoked a freedom she rarely felt. Greensun probed gently at first, then deeper, unraveling her thoughts on the Kennedy brothers, her fears of wiretaps snaking through her walls. "The FBI's watching," she confided, her fingers twisting a strand of platinum hair, eyes darting to the corners of the room as if shadows held listeners. He nodded, prescribing more sessions, more pills, but in those closed-door hours the line between healer and controller blurred. Murray lingered afterward, tidying invisibly, her presence a constant reminder that even in her own home, privacy was an illusion. Nights deepened the contrasts, fame's golden cage clashing with the isolation that gnawed at her core. While the world pored over her sultry photos and Playboy's inaugural issue, her nude calendar shots repurposed without consent, turning vulnerability into commodity, she retreated to her bedroom, a sanctuary of pale blue walls and a canopy bed that swallowed her small frame. Insomnia was her faithful companion, the clock ticking past midnight as she reached for the amber bottles. Amytal for the descent into sleep, Tuinal to hold it. When chemicals failed, she'd slip into the adjoining bathroom, its marble cool underfoot, and run a bath scented with Chanel No. 5, submerging until the water turned tepid, her mind drifting to unspoken fears. The miscarriages haunted her, 3 lost chances at the family she'd craved since her fractured childhood. In quiet moments she'd cradle her abdomen, whispering to ghosts, the pain a private storm amid public adoration. Relationships, those fragile lifelines twisted under the weight of control. Joe DiMaggio reappeared sporadically, his visits a bomb laced with tension. One afternoon in late spring he drove up in his Cadillac, bearing flowers, roses, always red, echoing their whirlwind romance. They walked the garden, her arm linked in his, past the citrus trees heavy with fruit, but conversations veered into arguments about her circle. Stay away from the Kennedys, he'd warn, his jealousy simmering like old embers. She laughed it off publicly, but privately, in her journal hidden beneath the mattress, she scrawled confessions: he loves me but he wants to own me. Power slipped through her fingers like sand, studios suspended her for unprofessionalism, agents negotiated her worth in smoke-filled rooms, and even friends like Dean Martin on the set of Something's Got to Give eyed her with pity during her absences, sick days masking the haze of dependency. Unsettling events punctuated the routine, whispers of intrusion that fueled her paranoia. One evening, as twilight painted the sky in bruised purples, she heard a noise outside, a rustle in the bushes beyond the pool house. Heart pounding, she dialed her publicist, Arthur Jacobs, voice trembling as she described the shadow figures she swore were there. Paparazzi? Spies? The call ended with reassurances, but she bolted the doors, drawing curtains against the encroaching dark. Habits formed barriers. Yoga in the mornings, stretched out on a mat in the sunroom, breathing exercises to steady the anxiety, afternoons lost to script readings, lines memorized in front of a mirror that reflected a face she barely recognized beneath the makeup. Decisions loomed large in those solitary hours. Should she confront Greensun about his overreach? Fire Murray, whose eyes seemed to catalog every pill swallowed, every call made? As July sweltered into August, the phone rang again in the dead of night, pulling her from a fitful doze. Peter Lawford's voice, slurred with drink, inviting her to a gathering at his Santa Monica beach house. Celebrities, politicians, the usual crowd. She hesitated, the receiver cool against her cheek, sensing the undercurrents the way these invitations masked agendas, her presence a trophy in games of influence. But loneliness won, she agreed, slipping into a Pucci dress that hugged her curves, a public armor for private vulnerabilities. The drive along the coast was a brief escape, wind whipping through her convertible, but arrival brought the familiar disquiet, laughter echoing off ocean view walls, glasses clinking, eyes appraising. Kennedy was there in spirit if not body, his name dropped in hushed tones. She mingled, her laugh bright but brittle, while inside, fears coiled: exploitation, betrayal, the slow erosion of self. Back home by dawn, the house silent save for the tick of the grandfather clock, she poured a glass of Dom Perignon, mixing it with chloral hydrate in a crystal tumbler. Seated at her vanity, she stared into the mirror, tracing the lines etching her face, marks of a life lived under scrutiny. A note lay half-written on the desk. To Bobby, words of affection mingled with pleas for freedom. But as the drugs softened the edges, she crumpled it, letting it fall to the floor. Outside, the world prepared for her next triumph, unaware of the threads pulling taut. Another call would come soon from an unexpected source, threatening to snap them all. The fragile equilibrium she'd clung to like a life raft in stormy seas. The call came the next afternoon, piercing the heavy August heat that blanketed Los Angeles. It was from Pat Newcomb, her press agent, voice urgent and edged with concern. "The studio's firing you," Pat said without preamble, the words landing like blows in the quiet of Marilyn's living room. "Something's got to give," suspended indefinitely, her absences cited as the cause, though everyone knew it was deeper. The pills, the delays, the whispers of unreliability that had dogged her since the misfits. Marilyn set the receiver down gently as if it might shatter, and sank into the cushioned sofa, its floral pattern a mocking reminder of domestic bliss she'd never fully grasped. Outside, the gardener clipped hedges in rhythmic snips, oblivious to the storm brewing within those walls. Publicly, the news would break as another Hollywood scandal. Marilyn Monroe, the bombshell, axed for diva behavior, her image splashed across tabloids with headlines screaming betrayal. But in private, it was a gut punch to her fragile sense of self, the routines that had structured her days now crumbling like sandcastles at high tide. She wandered to the kitchen, where Eunice Murray prepared a light lunch: sliced tomatoes, cottage cheese, a glass of milk, foods that grounded her amid the chaos. Murray's eyes followed her, watchful, reporting back to Green Sun in daily updates that Marilyn suspected but couldn't prove. The psychiatrist arrived later that day, his car pulling up the driveway with the familiarity of a frequent visitor. They sat in the sunroom, blinds half drawn against the glaring sun, as he dissected her reaction. "This is a setback, not the end," he soothed, but his words rang hollow. She confessed her fears, the emptiness gnawing at her, the sense that fame had hollowed her out, leaving a shell admired by millions but understood by none. As evening fell, the contrasts sharpened, the city's lights twinkling like distant stars while her world contracted to the confines of the house. Fame's allure had once promised escape from Norma Jean's orphanage shadows, but now it isolated her in a gilded prison. Phone calls trickled in sympathy from Dean Martin, who quit the film in solidarity, a terse message from Fox executives confirming the termination. She ignored them, retreating to her bedroom where habits took over. A hot bath first, steam rising in curls, her body submerging until only her face broke the surface. Eyes closed against the memories flooding in, foster homes where she slept in closets, the mother she'd visited in asylums, ranting about invisible threats. Was this her inheritance? The paranoia that made her double-check locks, question loyalties? Unspoken fears surfaced in fragments, dreams of being buried alive, crowds pressing in until she couldn't breathe. Relationships, once anchors, now felt like chains. DiMaggio sent a telegram offering support, but his possessiveness lingered in her mind, a reminder of why their marriage had fractured. The Kennedys were ghosts now. Bobby's last visit weeks ago, a hurried conversation in the garden about her problems, his eyes distant, focused on campaigns and crises far removed from her personal hell. She wondered if they'd ever seen her as more than a diversion, a beautiful distraction in their power games. Nights like this amplified the unsettling quiet. After the bath, wrapped in a silk robe, she padded to the living room, flipping on the television to low volume, a black and white western flickering shadows across the walls. Pills waited on the nightstand, a handful swallowed with champagne, the bubbles tickling her throat as she lay back, waiting for the fog to descend. But sleep evaded her, thoughts circling decisions left unmade. Sue the studio? Seek new roles? Or retreat entirely, vanish into anonymity like she'd fantasized in quieter moments? The next day brought more visitors, blurring the lines between ally and intruder. Arthur Jacobs arrived with newspapers, folding them to hide the headlines, but she snatched them anyway, reading the barbs with a detached calm. "They call me difficult," she murmured, "but they don't know the half of it." He suggested a press conference, a comeback narrative, but she waved it off, her mind on the red diary hidden in her drawer, entries about the Kennedys, the mob whispers from Sinatra's circle, secrets that could unravel empires if leaked. As the sun set on August 4, 1962, the house settled into its evening rhythm. Murray prepared dinner, Green Sun stopped by for a final session, probing her mood with clinical precision. She felt the weight of it all, the controlled life, the hidden pains, the fame that devoured while the world applauded. A last phone call to her half-sister, Bernice, voice steady but laced with farewell. Then, alone in her room, the pills again, more this time, chasing peace in the deepening dark. But in those final hours, as the city pulsed beyond her walls, questions lingered like smoke. What if she'd broken free? Fought harder against the puppeteers? The answers slipped away, buried under layers of glamour and grief, leaving only the echo of a life lived in halves, public icon, private enigma. And as dawn crept in, the phone rang unanswered, the world on the cusp of discovering the ultimate hidden truth. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.